I'm going to share my screen and let me know if you guys see this.
I see it.
Yeah. All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for spending, this night attending this meeting. And you could be anywhere else right now, but you're here, educating yourself. And I think this is a pretty important topic, for any real estate investor to really know the process and kind of like what goes into the land entitlement process. So I will start this PowerPoint. It's about 18 slides, and I'm just going to run through a little bit of my background, some projects that are related to entitlements, and then jump into really the process as I've done it in the past, and basically as I'm doing it now on a project here in the Carolinas. So quick disclaimer, information in the end process that we're going to be discussing today regarding land entitlements is related to my professional and ongoing experience with those specific cities and state agencies. So this process can be replicated no matter where you are in this country, but it's important for the developer to become knowledgeable in their specific area of interest and determine the review and agency's site-specific design standards, entitlement processes, and reviewing agency nuances. So that being said, I'm not going to go through everything there. Basically, I'm a licensed land development engineer for the last 17 years, and that's where most of my land entitlement experience come from the Northeast. I'm an ex-partner of a multidisciplinary civil engineering firm that we pretty much did all of the engineering disciplines, structural, civil, geo survey. I was the head lead for the land development division. We were involved with many different sectors in the Northeast, and many of our clients are some of these listed there. Developers, private agencies, private public companies, so a very long list there. My journey started back in 2017 as a small-time flipper, where I did basically a couple of flips on the side, followed by multifamily, where I met my partner, Mark, and we got into small duplex, triplex in the Northeast, and then eventually we kind of grew to the multifamily syndication, which we do now. Last year, I was lucky enough to transition over as a full-time investor, syndicator, and really starting my first land entitlement project, but this time not as the designer, which is what most of my experiences is, but as on the developer side, which is very different from the side that I'm very experienced with. This is the New York City Police Academy. You see that, right?
Yep.
All right, great. So I'm going to go through just a couple of very high-level projects because it kind of puts the entitlement process in context related to very large projects, very complicated projects versus some of the local projects. This project here is the New York City Police Academy in College Point, Queens. So people from this area probably know this location. So how do you take a parking lot, basically 35 acres of parking lot, and build a world-renowned headquarters for the New York City Police Department? Well, it's pretty large, $950 million project. Probably was more than $1 billion at the end of the day. Basically, 720,000 square foot of police academy training facility for the entire 5 boroughs area was designated for this site. Duration 9 years from design all the way to final construction. So very long time frame. And this is what I'm talking about when you're doing these types of public projects. They take much, much longer to take a piece of, basically you would think an empty parking lot to build what you have there. And really it's because the reasons that I list there. It's many stakeholders are involved. It's a public comments periods are very lengthy. You have to put in environmental impact statements through the DEP on the federal side, which takes upward of 18 months to 2 years to get through. You have federal and city dollars that go into these type of projects, further increasing the red tape. You have very large design teams. My role was a very small role as the civil design for this. And you had architects, MEPs, just a huge team of engineers that were needed to really design this type of project and entitle it and get it to final construction. Many, many meetings, as you can imagine. And really, it's these types of projects are very political and not without any controversy. Army Corps of Engineers also had a role in this project. Now, I gave you kind of a definition of navigable water. So anytime you have a site which has some sort of creek or stream or river, you want to make sure that you figure out if it's an Army Corps of Engineers labeled navigable water, and that's kind of the definition. Anything that really is subject to the ebb and flow of tide or has been used in the past as a transport interstate of any kind of foreign commerce could fall under the navigable water designation. And that, again, is a very lengthy process through the federal side, which is the Army Corps of Engineers, if you want to touch any of that. So in our situations, we had that little stream going through the site, which was an ACOE designated waterway that even increased the length of the duration of the design and entitlement for this type of project. This next one is kind of just showed you what the final product looks like. It's a pretty amazing facility. That's a rendering above, and that's kind of like what was done before. It won a lot of awards. It was designed by world-class architect companies. They have mock subway train stations inside the facility. They have mock parks, buildings, anything that is going to put the police through certain trainings is located in these buildings. So it was a pretty amazing project when it was finished. The next one is this is more of a typical. It's Amazon delivery stations. Basically, these are the last mile delivery stations that you see pop up everywhere. These are pretty straightforward. We did a few of these, and really it just goes through the local process of zoning board of adjustments, planning boards, DEP. This was the Delaware project, so it was the Delaware DOT. And then we brought it all the way through construction permitting, oversight, and then final construction inspection. So these were more of the bread and butters that we worked on because it was a pretty straightforward process. Most of the time, these projects are not very contentious because they're bringing jobs to areas that really need it. So I would say that most of the time, the city, the municipality is very open to allowing these types of projects and approving these things. So they're very happy to see these come in most of the time, not every time though. This one is a very unique project you're not going to see. This is the Spectra Energy Manhattan Gas Line project. It was built around 2012 and finished around 2016, 17. And basically, the section that I worked on, that our company worked on, went from Staten Island through Bayonne, Jersey City, Hoboken, which is what you see in the background there. That's the clock tower over in Hoboken, and then under the Hudson River into the west side of Manhattan. That section of project alone went over $1 billion just to design and construct and entitle that project. And the reason was because it was going through just dense city. I mean, it was going through Jersey City, Hoboken, Greenville, all these very densely populated cities where really it's very limited right of way that you can install these things. And this is the 48-inch, 4-foot diameter, 3/4-inch steel pipe that is welded together on site. And this section that you see there is basically in the process of being pulled under the Hudson River from the Manhattan side in order to supply natural gas to the people in Manhattan and the 5 boroughs. So this was a pretty large project that allowed for a lot of these properties in the city to convert over from oil to natural gas, which is a much cleaner burning fuel for heating. This project, obviously, multi-year approvals through city, state, federal agencies were involved with this. Even eminent domain, which is the legal right of the federal government to take land, private land from individuals for the sake of a project that improves the overall community or the city. So eminent domain was allowed. This was an ongoing design change project. Basically, it was ongoing changes as the project was being built, just due to the amount of different obstacles, coordinations, issues that you would run into when you're constructing something like this within a very densely populated city like Hudson County, which it was going through. And then this one right here really holds a special place in my heart. Some people might know this area. This is the Tuxedo Reserve project. This is over in Bear Mountain, just north of Manhattan. And this project you see there in the arrow points to Route 17, and you can see kind of the scale of it. This is around 2,600 acres of land. And then this was my first project back in 2004 as a staff engineer when I graduated college. I completed some due diligence. I attended my first zoning board meetings. My first planning board meetings were on this project, and kind of just getting to know kind of the players and how everything kind of operated in the boards to get approval and all that. Unfortunately, I left this company long before any construction started. So it was just one of those projects that I put in sweat, blood, and tears, working really late nights, submitting drawings, but yet I did not see anything come out of it. It was basically vacant land. And I'll give you some background on this project. It's a pretty interesting project. This 2,700 acres of land is owned by Stephen Ross. I'm not sure, some of you might know him. He is the chairman of the Related Companies. And his vision for this project for Tuxedo Park began in 1989 when he started, I believe around the late 80s, he started Related Companies with like $10,000 a loan from his mother to start this company. The first approval for this project was in 2004. Imagine 1989, kind of like the design started with first approvals in 2004. Site work, as you see there, began around 2017-18. And to this day, I actually went to the public hearing on the website. They're still having public hearings for this project to get approval. So what's taken so long, right? Why is it's not a project that was started in the 90s still to this day not built? Well, it was a very contentious project. This project abuts it's near the wealthy town of Tuxedo Park, and the citizens there are adamantly opposed to this project. It requires zoning board, planning boards. Of course, you got historical boards, environmental boards. It's not an as of right project, meaning it's not the current zoning and use for this thing has to be changed over for what Stephen wants to build on here. So for the 2,400 acre, he wants to put in 2,000 single family homes and over 500,000 feet of commercial space on this property. And as you imagine, the grades are very steep on this property, and you can actually see Manhattan for a lot of points from this project. So the properties are going to go for a pretty handsome amount. 70% of Tuxedo is protected parkland, adding to additional red tape that this project kind of has to go through. So how is that sustainable? How is a project like this sustainable? Well, any other developer obviously would have abandoned this project a long, long time ago, right? But you have deep pockets. You have Stephen Ross, the owner of Related. He built Hudson Yards. They're the largest landlord in New York City. They manage over $4 billion in equity capital. And Mr. Ross is 78 years old right now. And he said that he wants this project completed. We'd like to see it get it done. So it's kind of like a pet project of his. He wants this project finished. And the reason why it's still going to this day is just, there's only one reason, is the money is there and he just wants to get it done. So what is it going to take to finish this project? Well, Related Companies has is planning on building a $12 million YMCA recreational center that they're going to be donating to the Tuxedo Park. They've invested millions of dollars in the improvements of Route 17, which is the roadway right there at the bottom. They've installed a brand new wastewater treatment plant. They made improvements to the Tuxedo Park Amtrak train stations, as well as $2 million in small business grants and more. So these are the concessions that slowly the town is requesting and requiring as they're going through this approval process. So these are just some of the things that it's going to take for this project to come to fruition. And these projects are basically from different categories. You have large New York City projects, you have federal projects, and then you have more local projects with different levels of entitlements that are needed. So what is land entitlement? Land entitlement is a legal process that involves obtaining approvals to develop a property for a specific use. So think of a piece of land that's not currently zoned properly for your specific use. Either it be you want to put in something commercial, you want to build single family, you want to build multifamily or industrial. You got to make sure that your piece of property is zoned properly for it. These are a couple of the boards that you need to get through in order to get approval for this. So you have the Zoning Board of Adjustments, basically the authority that grants variances. If your project is not as of right, you need to pursue variances. And they approve any kind of rezoning that your parcel of land requires. After you're done going through the ZBA, you then go through the Planning Board of Approvals, the PBA. So once rezoning is finished, you then put together what's called a preliminary final site plan set, which is developed. And this process basically involves the majority of your professional team, your design team, that's going to be basically designing the project and putting together a drawing set that it shows your vision, shows your proposed improvements that you're looking to do. Other boards that can come up. So this is the town of Dobbs Ferry, New York, right in Westchester County. We had a project there. These are just some of the boards on top of the ZBA and the PBA that we had to go through. I mean, this is a little bit extreme because it's a very bureaucratic city, and there's a lot of different boards that you need to get through before you even get approval. So it's very expensive to build in towns like Dobbs Ferry and other places in the Northeast, just due to the fact that you just have so many committees, so many trustees and boards that you need to get through in order to get permits and get your all as of right approvals to then start construction. So what does the process look like? Right now, we're talking about just land entitlement, but prior to land entitlement, you have your feasibility analysis and due diligence. This is basically where you, as the potential investor, developer in a piece of property, locate the property. You figure out if your product is something that area needs and wants. Is there a need for your multifamily? Is there a need for a warehouse where you're putting it? Population growth, comparable rents and comps, and all that stuff has to be done prior to what is the entitlement phase, which is what the phase that we're in right now. So you want to kind of get your feelers out there before you put the property on a contract and go through the entitlement process. And then obviously after the entitlement process is where you have all your approvals necessary to start your construction of your project. So I broke this up in phases. You have your phase one, really like as multifamily, it's very similar where you have to put your team together, because you by yourself, I'm not going to get through this process without the use and without the help of architects, engineers. As I show there, these are just the majority of list of engineers you will require. And this is just based on my experience really in the Northeast, where you really require a lot of professionals to get you through the process. What I'm realizing here in South Carolina and North Carolina is the process is much simpler. There's not a need to have all of these professionals on your team, just due to the fact that the less red tape, less bureaucracy in this area. So that really helps with expediting your land entitlement process. Definitely recommend at least 2 proposals from each discipline in order to kind of develop your high-level soft costs. So soft costs are basically your engineers, your land attorney costs, anything that is going to get you through the land entitlement process are your soft costs on your project. You want to definitely select your team based on experience. The cost is an aspect. I wouldn't say it's the most important, and definitely the timeline. And definitely whoever you do select, that person or individual, whoever is going to be the lead for the entitlement process, should be somebody that really has gone through the process in that town that you're looking to build, or you're looking to go through this process. And because they're going to be familiar with the board members, they're going to be familiar with all the nuances that city or municipality has, and they're going to really help you out through the process versus using an outside engineer or architect that's not familiar with the process. It's good to use local help in that aspect of things. So your phase 2A, and then I broke it up in phase 2B. These 2 phases can kind of occur concurrently. You have your conceptual preliminary design. And that's basically where you try to determine, can you fit the amount of units that you anticipate in your pro forma, right? Is the land large enough? Is the developable area big enough to fit in so many buildings that's has 24 units per building? How many buildings can you fit within your area that's allowed to build on? What are your high-level construction costs? So what are your vertical costs, meaning ground up? What are your horizontal costs, your roadways, your flat works, your anything civil related. Grading work is a big one also. Those are horizontal costs. And then the soft costs I went over earlier related to more of your engineering, your land entitlement processes. Are you disturbing wetlands? Are you in floodplains? Are you in protected habitats? All that stuff is very important because no matter where you are, I feel like in this country, I haven't worked in a lot of most states, but I have worked in a handful of different states that when you're in wetlands or floodplains or any type of protected habitat area, you are going to have restrictions on what you can disturb in those areas, no matter what state you're in. The other one is really like any risks that are associated with your project. So If you're looking to connect to utilities, what are the utilities that are nearby to you? Do you need access roads? Is that going to require Department of Transportation approvals? These are all things that you really should be doing during this phase of the project before you really start dumping in a lot of money in your engineers and your architects. Because if you start something and then later, as you start engaging these engineers and architects, you realize that you don't have utilities. You realize that the DOT approval process is just too lengthy. You don't have enough frontage for roadways. Those might be things that could potentially kill your project, and you want to try to limit the amount of money you're spending early on by identifying these type of kind of deal killers, I guess you would call them. And a big one is community pushback. Do you think that the community is going to be against this? And a good way to find out is to really get in touch with a planning board officials in the city and find out what their feeling is and what they've approved before. And because they've been through a lot of planning board and approval process, so they would be a good person to kind of give you a clue as to how much pushback your potential project will have in that area. You definitely want to do a pre-app meeting with the public agency that you're looking to submit to. So this is basically a sit-down meeting with your city officials with a very high-level concept plan, very high, something that you do basically in the beginning as you're engaging your architects. So they can put together a very quick, fast and dirty indication of how many buildings you could put on there or how large of a warehouse you're able to fit on there. And through that sit-down meeting, you just attend those things and basically you listen to their concerns, or you listen to any potential obstacles that they might bring up that could be things that you need to bring back to the drawing board and maybe brainstorm with your design team and see how you can manipulate and change things to meet their requirements. At the same time, you also want to try to start really scheduling, maybe starting some of the things on the right, your phase one environmental studies, your boundary and topographic surveys, your utility surveys, your geotech investigation, all that stuff is absolutely necessary as you go through the design process, but they're not necessarily needed as you're doing the initial concept preliminary. So you want to make sure you kind of like gauge where the left side of the things are as far as like how you think this project is going to progress before you really start pulling the trigger on some of the items on the right, because some of the things, especially geotech investigations, can be very, very costly. You want to try to avoid maybe not doing them if you don't have to right away. As soon as you think you have a green light and thinks it's going to be smooth sailing for your project, you definitely want to start starting those things on the right. And that's why I kind of put an asterisk on the right there. And it's important to understand zoning, right? So this is a zoning map of Lancaster, South Carolina. Basically, you have different colors there that designate the different areas that the city wants you to build on, right? So everything red that you see there is kind of like city center stuff, commercial, mixed use, retail. And a zoning map is basically a way of a city kind of directing the developer and investor as to how they envision the city growing, how they want the city to kind of develop over time. And this is definitely part of a master plan concept that a lot of cities put out, and it's something that you should definitely be familiar with, because that provides basically a guide to us as investors or developers to follow. And as you can see there in arrows, those are multifamily properties. It's interesting, I pointed these out because those multifamily properties are surrounded by R15 residential properties, which are all single family stuff, but then you have large multifamilies jammed in between them, versus the arrows on the bottom right, where you would see, I would think that you would see a little more flexibility in more as you get closer to the city with the multifamily stuff, versus on the outskirts where you see there an arrow. And then the other arrow there that popped up to the top or left, so that's the property that we have under contract right now that we're looking to put in a multifamily asset there. And that's basically right on the outskirts of the city limits. So that's going to require us to annex that piece of property into the city of Lancaster, meaning everything that you see right now within the limits in color there, that's all city limits, right? And as the city grows over time, a city may start off really small, but as the city grows, it starts annexing properties around it therefore city continues to grow and grow and expand their footprint. So one of the requirements for annexation is that your property needs to be directly connected or touching a little. It can even be a 50-foot section of city limit in order for you to be approved for annexation into the city limits. Now, if your property is not touching it, but you have a neighboring property that is touching it and you're bordering that property, you can come into some sort of an agreement with that landowner that if he wants to annex himself into the city limits, you then have a continuous property that's now touching the city limits that allows you there. So it does require a couple of more steps if you're not directly connected to the city limits. In our case, as you can see there, we have a pretty large section of property that's directly connected there, so that should not be a problem to be annexed. And the reason why you want to be annexed into the city limits is because it allows you to connect into water. It allows you to connect into city sewer. A lot of things that are really vital and very important for any type of project that you put on there, especially multifamily, where you're going to require quite a bit of water and definitely sewage to service the properties. And the last phase really is, as I mentioned, annexation into the city limits to take advantage of sewer water. You then move on to zoning board of adjustments. For our property, it needs to be rezoned because right now it's an R15. And after initial high-level discussions, we feel like that this property is very likely that it shouldn't be an issue having to rezone to multifamily. Seeing how there's other projects like that I showed you earlier that have been approved prior. And there's basically some precedence there as far as us then requiring the rezoning of our property from R15 to multifamily, or a little bit high density is what they call it. It basically increases the amount of units we can add on that property. Once we get through the zoning board approval, we then have to get through any other boards that are needed before we go through the planning board approvals. And this is basically where, as I mentioned, you put together the preliminary final site plan approval set by your engineers, your architects, which is, I would say, a couple of month process. You submit that to the planning board of approvals. This does go through a couple of just requirement steps I didn't add in there because there is quite a bit of different smaller steps in between there, like one of the steps is called a completeness review that's done for every board, where it goes to the secretary of that board and they just do a kind of glance over to make sure that all your paperwork is correct, and it's called a completeness review. Once that secretary goes through the checklist and sees that everything is in your set, everything has been submitted accordingly and properly, they then pass it over to the actual planning board members and their professionals, their third-party professional that review the planning board set for approval. So it's a process, but this is kind of like a very high level process as far as like the major boards are going to be looking at your set for ultimate approval. So you have a couple of different outcomes. You have to attend, obviously, public hearings for each of the boards, and it opens up to public comment if anybody's against it. The project can be approved on this, during the meetings with minor revisions. It can also be conditionally approved, meaning that they'll approve the project, but with conditions that you're going to be making the changes as discussed during the planning board meeting. So they could be, when you get conditional approval, usually the changes require a little bit more work on the design side of change, but they have approved your project to move forward, pending your comments are updated. So Tuxedo Farms is one that they've been through many conditional approvals where they've had to change things, they had to go through the process all over again. The next one is the application is just flat out denied, and just because it's denied, it doesn't mean you can't go back there with changes. It can be denied, and they'll tell you the reason why they're denying it. So then you kind of just go back to the drawing board, make your tweaks, make your revisions, resubmit, and see if you can maybe get through the planning process with the changes that were discussed during the meeting. And then your application, you can withdraw your application and resubmit it at a later date. You have a 1 year. Once you submit everything, it's usually a 365-day, 12-month period that application can sit there before it completely expires and you're taken off the books, and then you have to do the whole entire submittal process all over again. After you get all your approvals, I mean, that's really where contractors then take your drawing set, and typically they pull all the permits for it. So your design team obviously helps the contractor with that. Your approval is memorialized. Updated and approved permits set can move to the building department now. So now you're able to get your horizontal work permitting, your grading and clearing permitting, your land disturbing permits can be done, soil erosion permit, utility permits, anything that you need to tap into the city system. You need to go through that specific permitting agencies, but those permits are much easier to process because the set has already been approved by the governing bodies that I spoke to prior. These are just kind of like formalities that need to go through the utility contractor or utility management people that need to look at it and basically just sign off on it. And then you got your vertical work. So that's an entire approval process that can be a set-alone discussion that's handled by the contractor. So you have your your foundation inspections, your electrical inspections, your rough work inspections for plumbing. There's a whole process there that contractors that are brought on board are very familiar with. I went over that. So this is a project near to me, and basically by following all the steps prior and making sure that your engineer team is on their game and able to get through the entire process, you're able to take a piece of property like this here and slowly clear it. Is basically the first phase of it. So within the prior years, the next step really is your construction phase. So this within 1 year from the previous slide, they were able to install roadways. It looks like they did some foundation pads for each of the building. They built up a bunch of buildings there. I believe this one's around 365 acres. I know because my parents actually live in this location here. It's a very nice complex. It's a very large complex, and this is kind of like the finished product, April 2022, when it was finished. And you can see to the north and the east, there's even more projects that were in the process of being, entitled and developed. To the north, you got all single family, a lot of stuff you see down here, single family subdivisions and all that. And then I think the bottom right is another multifamily that they're building down there. That's an example of a successful project. That's an example of something that's done a lot down here, and hopefully something that will be successful doing in the next year or two. And this one right here, so this is nearby to where I live. So the arrow points to Morningstar Church. It's the evangelist Jim Baker. I believe he owned the majority of the area here way back 30, 40 years ago. He built the 21-story high-rise building that made it all the way to the South Carolina Supreme Court. It was some kind of fraud occurring there, but basically this is kind of an example of a project that really has no use here. I mean, surrounding this area, we're all just single family, like at the most 2 stories, maybe 3 stories in the area. And then they go in and try to get a 21-story high-rise building built in the middle of this area. We're about 30 minutes from Charlotte, where maybe the closest high-rise there is over that. But I guess it just shows you, what money can buy in this area, because guarantee that this height, there was definitely a height restriction for this project. And as you can see there, that view, it's just very awkward building. I mean, it's kind of like a sore thumb in the area, having this 21-story building there. It's been sitting vacant for 30 years. Basically, he started construction 30 years ago. There was some fraud related to overselling of timeshares. I think he might have done a little jail time, and basically it's been sitting there, and they've been going back and forth with York County, putting in proposals and saying that they have a new idea. They want to convert it this year. They want to convert it over to a retirement center for seniors, and it's still sitting vacant there. But I got to tell you, with the condition that building is in and how long it's been sitting vacant for, it's going to require just so much money that you have to dump into this building just to get it like safe again before you even start completing the amenities and just finishing the building. So the county wants to tear it down. Jim Baker wants to keep it and finish it. So it's a continual battle between Morningstar Church and York County. So we'll see where this thing goes. That's basically it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that.
Thank you, Gonzalo. That was awesome. Packed a lot of information.
Any questions?
Certainly can see how knowledgeable you are in the space and how much you enjoy it. So
Thank you.
I'll open it up and anybody has any questions, jump right in. So if not, I'll kick out, a question first. Definitely, putting this in the context of multifamily and some of us that are investing in looking at deals, so many times a broker will come to us and say, hey, this property sits on, a large parcel of land and you can, it's 12 units and you can build another 12, and they try to price that in. So, when things like that come across, like, what are the questions to ask? Like, can you build, or, like, how do you kind of unpack that information and go from there?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I've seen them in quite a bit pro formas, right? Where it's a large parcel, where there's a large multifamily area there, and the pro forma anticipates building out, 36 more units or something with a piece of the property that they put in a quick rendering and throw it on there, right? But it's really more than that. You really have to take that with a grain of salt, because as I kind of showed you through the slideshow, there's a lot that goes into getting something like that approved, right? So you have zoning requirements, you have just the appetite of the area having more buildings being built in that land alone, right? Not to mention density requirements to see if you can even put additional units. Maybe your parcel is already maxed out. So you got to do your due diligence. You got to talk to people like myself, to other land development engineers, and really dig into it a little bit more. You don't just take the broker's pro forma and just kind of run with it,
This is Ty. I have a quick comment / question if Gonzalo wants to extend on it. In Lancaster County and in the city there, it's going to take us about probably less than 6 months to get full entitlements on that project. So one of the things, if anybody's interested in land development, really finding the municipalities that are development friendly, really kind of trying to go and meet to be able to understand the needs of that community and getting on board with them, because it's hard to put a square peg in a round hole, if you follow me on that. So, in Charlotte, which is, really close by, the development process is quite long. It's 12 to 18 months as opposed to 4 to 6 months in a project like this. Gonzalo, I think that's an important point if people are interested in development. What are your thoughts on that, sir?
Yeah, I mean, Ty, you have a lot more experience in the development side, but I agree. I mean, most of my experience, as you know, comes from the Northeast, where it's very bureaucratic, a lot of boards, 12 to 18 months is typical in New Jersey, where you have over 365 different municipalities in just New Jersey. I mean, every single municipality has their own different type of processes that you have to get familiar with. And just because you did something in Westfield doesn't mean you can do the same thing in Jersey City. There's different board members. There's a lot of politics at play. There's pay to play. That's another big thing in New Jersey, where sometimes you get put on the bottom of the stack if you don't pay to play, So these type of things in Lancaster, it seems like so far it's a very smooth process. It's very quick from what you mentioned. And Ty, I know that you have a property over in Charlotte, and you're looking at some high-rise potential development there. I mean, is that kind of like the process, the length of process you're seeing potentially there if you do kind of move forward with that?
Yeah, that is a unique project. It's a covered land play where we have a 30-unit apartment building, and we are working a business plan on that. I am one of the GPs on the project, and we are working a business plan. We got really good rent movement. We got about $400 per door just on the business plan for value add, and it is in Uptown Charlotte. and so with the current zoning, which is going to be changed around a little bit here over the next like 5 months, we're going to wait and kind of see what that looks like at the end of the day. But right now, we believe that we'll be able to get 5/2, which just simply means we can get 5 stories over 2 stories of underground parking on our 6/10 of an acre in uptown Charlotte. Currently, there is a 3 garden style structures that is a total of 30 units. So it would be a complete knockdown of those to build something bigger. There's another development in uptown Charlotte. The developer who's done projects up in New York is getting 32 stories on a 7/10 of an acre parcel. That's going to be like 392 apartment units. So we're pretty excited about that. We'll probably end up doing the entitlements for that and then flipping it to a larger developer.
Question on that front for Gonzalo and maybe Ty as well. Is that kind of the approach with parcel that you all have, entitle it and sell it to a developer, and then more generally, how do you make that decision between whether or not you want to develop it or just turn around and come, once you have it all entitled, to kind of turn around and sell it?
Gonzalo, you want to answer that, or you want me to? I'd love to.
Yeah, why don't you jump in, because I know you've done, you really know the process on the exit strategies for those.
Yes, sir. I like land development, and business is business. Cash is king. So really, in my process of evaluating what my best exit strategy is where is my cash flow? So if the timing is right, building it and taking it through to fruition is a good option. If your cash flow is not quite there, you got to forecast your cash flow, then selling it to a developer who might be able to swallow that up, maybe has a bigger appetite for something to actually go into the construction phase, then that might be the best option. So business is business. Now, on this particular parcel that Gonzalo and I are doing together, we are looking at a potential 168 units right now is kind of the number we're looking at. And I personally, and we'll cross that line here soon, but my primary strategy is to actually take that through to construction and do about a 10-year hold on that property. We'll stabilize it and then refinance it and keep it for the long haul. We could JV with another developer that wants to kind of a joint venture with us, and that's an option. Or we could actually flip the entitled land, not breaking ground, and let somebody else come in and do that. We are getting some BOVs right now, a broker's opinion of value on those right now, just to see kind of where those line up. But I personally, and Gonzalo will have his say on this too, but personally, I'd like to actually either JV or actually take it through to construction, which we've done on an 82 unit in Arizona before ourselves.
Yeah, I actually like. I tend to side more on the conservative side, and I do like the idea of obviously purchasing raw land. You can purchase it fairly cheaply on a per acre basis, just because it's not really doing anything. It's not entitled, and get it up to potentially 130, 150,000 an acre, because you've been through this entire process. It's a process that requires at-risk capital, a lot of coordination with all these different entities, and making sure it's risky, right? So my feeling is definitely is flipping it and kind of moving on to the next project. But like you mentioned, cross that bridge when we get there.
So guys, how do you structure your offer on the raw land? Is everything contingent on you guys obtaining the proper approvals from all the different boards, or are you kind of going into it a little bit figuring you're probably going to get some, but you need to tie up the property for a couple months to see what you can get?
Yeah, great question. So this is a similar process that other people similar people that are doing this are doing the same way, where we have a 6-month due diligence period with a 2-month extension, and within that 6-month period, we have the ability to really, terminate the contract, get all of our earnest money deposit back without really spending too much money. Maybe a little bit of money on transactional attorneys for the PSA, $1,000 there, and then maybe a little bit to put together the conceptual drawings, which is what the civil and the architect is going to help us do to see how many units we could fit on there. But if we feel like it's not going to be a project that's going to kind of pay out, we could technically terminate within the 6-month period and with little money into the deal. So once the deal does get annexed into the city limits, the taxes on that property actually go up because now it's part of the city taxes, where it's serviced by water and utilities. So the city adds a little more taxes on that property. So in the contract is that once we annex that property, I believe we give up, how much was it, Ty? Like $5,000 or something like that? Goes hard, something. I forget.
Yeah, 5,000 after the annexation.
Right.
Yeah.
5,000 goes hard after the annexation. So, again, with that, we want to make sure that before we even annex it into the city limits, we have rezoning locked up, whereas meetings like we shouldn't have a problem with rezoning. And the most important part is that we can fit the amount of units that we want to fit on that property, and maybe get a high level construction cost from a contractor for grading. Since our site is a little bit on the steeper side, grading is going to cost a little bit. And based on all that, we do have a couple outs.
So you think just in your due diligence alone, you may be spending, tens of thousands to find this out?
So I would say due diligence. Yeah. Oh, wow. You're talking about the whole entitlement process?
Well, just in due diligence to get to a level where, you're going to move forward. Like, could you end up spending, 30, 40, 50 grand?
I don't think we'll go that far. I think it will be much less than that. I'm thinking maybe 5 to 10. We would spend maybe on concept drawings, if that, just to get a very good idea, a good feeling as to what we can do with that property before we move it forward with annexation and rezoning. The next step following rezoning is the PBA, which we felt from the officials that it's going to be a pretty smooth process. And we got the same indication from the civil engineer because he's actually working on the property just to the left of us, putting in a large subdivision there. So he knows the process pretty well. But the entire entitlement process, it's going to cost around $430,000.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Does that entitlement process scale well in the sense that, maybe as you get larger and larger parcels, maybe on a per acre basis, kind of the cost goes down, or is it doesn't really matter?
Yeah, definitely. It definitely scales as you have more land, you're developing more buildings, your cost goes down. So the way that architects are pricing these things out for us is that they price us on one building, and then each additional building is a much lower price. So as you have even more buildings added onto it, it's a reduced price per building basis. So you are getting a little bit of a scale pricing there if your property does get bigger and bigger.
Thanks.
What about if you wanted to just do an entry level play, just grab some land somewhere out, Montana, for example, grab and hold, you have to pay taxes. What are the other things you got to think about?
You mean just like not to do anything with it? Just
wait for someone. Yeah.
I would think, you obviously are responsible for, the taxes on the property, but it's really not going to be producing anything for you, It's going to be like a unproductive piece of property just that you're paying a mortgage on, or maybe just have a bunch of cash dumped into it.
Awesome. Anybody else have any other questions?
Yeah. Hey, Gonzalo, this is Richard Hall in Austin. This was a great presentation and gave a good viewpoint. Being in Austin, we're not quite as difficult on entitlement as maybe the Northeast, but we're close. It seems like a lot of cities are going more towards a form-based code, or just there's more contentious land use as the community gets involved and wants to have a say in what's going on. It'd be nice, in a capitalistic society that we'd have more a right to do what we want on the property as long as it doesn't impede on somebody else. But it seems like that's the way it is. So if we were to push out into the outer suburbs or other areas, are you seeing solutions for like wastewater treatment on site? That seems to be a huge consideration that impedes development. You may have water, but you don't have wastewater, and you really want the density that only a centralized wastewater system would have. Is there technologies that you're seeing or you're encouraged by?
Yeah, that's really interesting because a lot of these projects want to be next to wastewater treatment plants. So one thing that I didn't mention is that another big thing that you definitely want to consider if you're building a multifamily project is that making sure that the city has capacity in their wastewater treatment plant. So if their wastewater treatment infrastructure is at capacity, and you go and purchase this land, you develop it, and then later on you start finding out that, hey, the city can accept more sewage. Well, you're going to have to now probably put some money in the coffers of the city to expand their wastewater treatment center. Or, as you mentioned, some sort of on-site system that you would have to build. Now, most of the projects down here in the Carolinas, they strategically place their projects in areas where they have capacity. So even if they have to pump their sewage to a main pump station that then goes to the wastewater treatment plant of the city, they'll do that. They'll put money in the coffers of the city to build to maybe upgrade the pump station and then install their lines. But for 100, 200 unit complexes, I haven't seen them actually build a wastewater treatment plant like on site to treat the water. I guess that's definitely an interesting concept. I've seen it on single family duplexes where you can actually put, septics and treat the system yourself, like small septic systems. Mobile home parks, they have on-site septic systems that are able to accept dozens of pads, mobile home pads. And all you got to do is really just expand it and increase the size of it to take on additional sewage. But that definitely is something I would say, just make sure that you can tap into the city's wastewater treatment center. How's Texas as far as I know some people doing stuff in Texas, and I got to say it's completely different than definitely the Northeast, and probably even easier than the Carolinas to kind of work on things.
Yeah, it's case by case where you go. Austin's probably the most difficult in the entire state because it's a little more liberal and a little more constricted on land. Both pricing and community is very engaged with entitlement permissions. So other cities in the peripheral and the suburbs of Austin, or certainly Houston doesn't have any zoning. So you have pretty much a right to do what you want, provided, like you say, there's utility and other things that you meet as far as permitting and building structure. But Dallas is kind of in the middle between Houston and Austin, I guess. But every city is a little bit different, but we're definitely all growing by leaps and bounds. Just the economy and everything has been very much in our favor, but we'll see how it goes with the market shifting.
Well, normally we're 15 minutes away. That was a great presentation. I think if anyone doesn't have any other final questions, we'll break out and do some final networking for 10 minutes. But thank you so much, Gonzalo. I'll just check one more time if there was anybody else that had any final questions. And just a reminder, use the chat, drop your information. I will send out a recording over the next week. So this was a great opportunity to learn a lot tonight. Thank you so much, Gonzalo.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, drop my email in the chat there. Feel free to reach out.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. So yeah, hang around. I'm gonna just put it the way it works out, just do a random breakout session, put you in a room of 2 or 3 and network for this last 10 minutes. And again, thank you again for coming, and I will send out a note with recording and information on the next meetup. Thanks, guys.